Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and again, you can learn more about us at tertiumquids.org. Find out about our Tuesday morning group coalition and the work we're doing through the Virginia General Assembly. As referenced earlier in the program, this is the Fairfax County Supervisors meeting with the young lady we call EFC for its similarity to AOC, Eileen Fillercorn, and Senator Dave Marsden.
You're going to stick around for the 2 o'clock gun guys. Oh, yes, yeah, they are. They're just like little kids. As long as we just don't respond.
As long as we don't respond to them, and we will get through this, waiting around for the 10 o'clock gun nuts. This is how they've, and of course, to his credit, Senator Marsden responded by saying, "I wish I had said it to their face," ostensibly through a tweet. He said they are disturbing and indicative of mental health issues among many 2A supporters. This is what you're facing in a Senate that, though only one vote separates the majority from the minority, all these subcommittees are 9-5 Democrat because they get to write those rules. Joining us now is Legal Affairs Editor with Liberty Nation, Scott Cosenza. Scott, thank you for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. And full disclosure, I'm also a supporting member of the Virginia Institute for Public Policy.
Well, thank you for that. We really appreciate all the team members we have. We like to refer to ourselves as a do tank as much as a think tank, and we have managed to do quite a bit. And as we face Monday's lobby day with what they're expecting over 10,000 supporters, or as Senator Marsden refers to them as gun nuts, how do we move an issue with a General Assembly where I can recall 2011 when the Republicans took over the Senate? The first thing I heard from the Democratic caucus was they're not playing fair. They need to balance the committees. We're not getting our voices heard. And as soon as they get power, they set up every committee to be 9-5 votes so they can even run cover for members in particularly challenged districts.
I think it's even much worse than that because what we have is not only the 9-5 issue, like you say, but Chairman Edwards, on Monday, when he brought the gun bills to the fore, he went back on an agreement that they had made with the other side to not bring them up on Monday, but instead bring them up on Wednesday so that all the Republican members could be present for the hearing. Mm-hmm. And then they just absolutely went back on that word. And when asked why, he said, well, because the caucus, quote, the caucus strongly feels we should go today, meaning there's a better political benefit to go on a Monday morning when nobody's prepared to hear these bills that address an existential right of Virginians.
Well, it's like the political version of scoreboard, when you complain that somebody's cheating in a football game and the Patriots fans all say, yeah, but scoreboard. Look at all our. If it
weren't so tragic, it would be entertaining.
Well, talk first as a legal mind. Talk about an issue with a government that can completely reconstitute its rules of order. This has been fascinating to me that there isn't some standard operating procedure for the General Assembly. Minorities are going to change, but when the incoming majorities can completely rework the way the House and Senate operates in such a substantive way, that to me sounds like a sports league that can rewrite the rules in between periods.
Well, it does seem that way, doesn't it? We had some of this is just kind of like a new guy kind of error, I think, but a lot of it is by design and designed specifically to frustrate the will of the minority with respect to much of this legislation. They can't even handle the argument, Joe. That seems to be the position that they're in. It's one thing to say these bills are going to come out of committee. We all know they're going to come out of committee. But to then not even have the gumption to sit there and take it when the Virginians who disagree with them wish to express their preferences, boy, that just leaves a bitter taste, I think.
So what is the hope? And I compared this to Tuesday's anti-vaccine rallies, or actually, I guess the last week and a half's worth of anti-vaccine rallies in New Jersey that led to the New Jersey legislature finally voting down a bill that would have removed the religious option from their vaccine laws. And I said, see, and there's a group that comes into it pre-qualified in many places as nutty. And believe me, I know I've been in those conversations, whether it's fair or not. I'm just speaking the truth. And they won the day by being insistent, persistent. They didn't cause problems. They were just there. They were present. They were loud. Is there a lesson for the Second Amendment supporters in Virginia over what went on in New Jersey this week?
Well, as I talked to the leaders of that of the Second Amendment movement, the people who are fighting vigorously to hold on to their firearm rights in Virginia, they seem to think that the path forward to them for success, or at least not defeat in the legislature, is to go and attack maybe attack's the wrong word, but press as hard as they can the legislators who have recently won, and not by large margins, which there are many.
Yep.
They only need a couple to peel off to go against it. And I think that if I was a betting man, that they are counting on those people to not pass the worst of it, Joe, the confiscation type measures, rather than the one gun a month, which we already had before in Virginia, and I'm sad to say I think we'll probably have again.
Right. And sadly, none of these would have had any impact on any of the mass shooting events, probably why Virginia Beach itself passed a Second Amendment sanctuary among all places. Scott Cosenza is on with a legal affairs editor with Liberty Nation, LibertyNation.com on Freedom and Prosperity Radio this week, also supporting member of the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. The problem I seem to feel is facing a lot of conservatives and Second Amendment supporters, Scott, is that this is what the Democrats will do, the progressives, the statists, if you will. I think that's a more apt term, this year. And then by next session, it will be all, oh, no, we're just about infrastructure improvements in schools, so that come next election cycle, they will hope that a lot of this fire and brimstone that we're feeling has simmered down and they can go back to just business as usual.
I think that both in the Commonwealth and nationally, we see that support for gun control is broad and shallow. So for people who don't have a lot of skin in the game, they don't really know the tech, they often haven't even shot a gun in their life, they see these gun controls as they're sold as reducing those shootings, like you say, which of course they will not do, but that is how they're sold. And so that's why these people get wider support. But the deep support, Joe, comes from the gun rights advocates and people who treasure and want to hold on to their rights. And I think you're right that they will run away from their records of confiscation and control, because come election day, what many elections of the past have shown us in Virginia and elsewhere is that if you want to talk about single issue voting, gun owners probably lead the pack on that.
Well, and I look at some of these crowds that have attended, and as I said, Virginia Beach, not a conservative enclave, Northern Virginia, Fairfax, some of these areas that have passed Second Amendment sanctuary legislation, whether it's binding or not, these are rooms that are not just full of Republican voters. And I guess that's the point you were making, lobbying those new Democrats and saying, listen, we're not all Republicans here, and we could leave you just as quickly as you leave us.
If you look at that sanctuary map, it is staggering. There are a few tiny pockets where those sanctuary measures have not moved, but the rest of the state is green with sanctuary.
Mm-hmm. And Albemarle, of course, being our flagship area, being one of them, and some of the most derisive things said about the Second Amendment supporters there, short of Senator Marsden. Does the incident, as horrific and tragic as it was in Texas, you talked about broad and shallow, and a lot of folks who've never fired a gun, might be told, oh, well, you don't want to be scared in your office. I've read white papers on how this is the Democratic Party's attempt to win over the suburban white housewife since they're losing the urban black family to President Trump's agenda. Whatever the source of it may be, seeing an incident, especially captured on video like the Texas church defense, remind people that this is what a good guy with a gun looks like, because I've heard next to nothing in terms of pushback from the Bloombergites against this once that video came out.
Well, I think that the relevant populations probably aren't watching that video, which is to say those white suburban housewives. And my guess would be electorally, to get them to appreciate the nuance of that is an uphill battle. And that's why they go for the broad sort of shallow support of, oh, guns are evil. We don't want guns. Mm-hmm. It's just going to get us into problems. So let's have them taken away, and not considering the downside, which of course we're considering. Elimination from one-step thinking to a more nuanced analysis.
We've brought this up in abstract, but Qasem Soleimani had power over the Iraqi citizens because he ran the militias with the guns, and I've had great umbrage taken by Democratic listeners who have said, "Are you comparing us to those sorts of militias?" I said, Louise Lucas has a bill pre-filed that would say the only way you could qualify for gun ownership is if you're in a government-sponsored militia, and yet they seem to act like, oh, that wasn't real, or that's fake news, or we don't really mean that. It's a placeholder, et cetera, et cetera. And some of those things, what happens when they patently will lie to you to your face when you catch them in these sort of efforts to circumvent the Fourth Amendment or due process laws with these red flag legislations, Scott?
I tell you, the placeholder argument that you just mentioned to me is one of the more bizarre things, that these people would think that it is okay to do so with a gun legislation. But if you had a placeholder that stripped First Amendment rights away, or criminal due process outside of the gun area away, they would be the first ones to go marching down and say, this is completely unacceptable. And,
Mm-hmm.
and it is completely unacceptable. I watched the sausage being made at the committee hearing on Monday, and I can tell you that the red flag law in and of itself, Democrat senators were pointing out some of the massive problems involved, but they just passed it along for the full House to consider, or the full Senate to consider, presumably because they were under what passes for orders from the caucus to get it out there, rather than engage in the hard work of doing the committee's work, of legislating and actually getting through some of those tough issues. Even if you were on the other side of it and think that there should be red flag laws, surely you would think they would be good red flag laws that have some respect for due process.
No, not
That's
at all.
not what we're seeing.
Well, and with a police squad right down to, I want to call the commander Frank Drebin when the governor institutes it for rapid response on this. Scott Cosenza, legal affairs editor with Liberty Nation, also author of Roots of Liberty, Unlocking the Federalist Papers, the Bill of Rights, and You, through his history and he watched it. Talk about the impact, and you talk about the power of the caucus. By that, I worry that there are people who are misunderstanding Michael Bloomberg. And the little Napoleonic so-and-so that he is dropped bags of money after the last reporting session before the election. So nobody knew where these $50,000, bags of donations were coming from to get out the vote activities, rent minivans, pay for volunteers and that kind of thing. But he's not going to be back 2 years from now. He's going to be on to another state like a pack of locusts. Do these Democrats realize this? And is it something we could make clear to them that this guy is only here for this one victory lap, and then he's going to be gone to somewhere else, and they're going to be left holding, their electoral future in their own hands?
Well, it's one thing to say, and at the risk of sounding like a cynic, they are acutely attuned to their own future electoral interests. So I think if you put it out there and that'll resonate, then it will, because that's sort of what the VCDL is doing with their pressure campaign, which is to say, forget about right and wrong. Forget about the safety and security of Virginians to these legislators. think about your next election, and we're coming out in a way that we haven't before, is their message. So perhaps there's some that will land somewhere, Joe. I don't know.
One of the new members of the Virginia House of Delegates is from Charlottesville. She replaces the former head of the Democratic caucus, David Toscano, and Professor Sally Hudson held an event where she said, I'm going to get the legislature to give municipalities a chance to get rid of monuments, and this is quoting her, monuments that they find offensive and troubling. She held this event in front of what we call in Charlottesville the free speech wall. The Second Amendment buttresses or cornerstones so many other of these amendments, and I worry that as the second and fourth get trampled on, when does the first and the fifth, because we're already seeing property rights come under challenge in Virginia. I don't want to overplay it, but I feel like if that's gone, we are at the risk of all the other amendments in the Bill of Rights going the way of the dodo.
There's the saying, the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. That's where we express our demand for liberty. And I tend to agree with you that, when you look to China and you see what it looks like when totalitarian comes a knocking and you see an unarmed people essentially trying to fight back against it, I think it just hardens the resolve for many on the pro-gun side that they will not do it, and it's not just about guns, but it's about all the rest.
For the voters who might be members of the Democratic Party but believe in the Bill of Rights, especially even if it's not the second, it's the Sixth Amendment, for example, in some of our due process laws that they're rioting for in Hong Kong, or you bring that up, or Tehran, where they're all of a sudden fighting back against, the not just the dictator, but the theocratic dictator. Can we be abashed into realizing, oh my gosh, we have a government that's supposed to protect these and we want to get rid of it while all these people are getting shot at by their own police in order to try to get a little sniff of it?
Boy, I wish we could. There is hope to be had on some of the drug war stuff, I think, Joe. So it's not just a one-way pendulum, but we have to always press. I appreciated that you used the word statist earlier to describe the way these people think and what they're advocating for, because it's not about Democrat and Republican. It's a battle between people who want the state to be all and those of us who stand and say, no, we're individual humans and the power needs to rest with us, with the minority of one of each of us.
Governor Northam's State of the Commonwealth address, I put in the pantheon of some of the great tomes of technocracy, where it was just this scornfully dripping treatise on things the government has to do for you because you can't do it for yourself, nor should you be expected to. And those are the things. Maybe we're at that point in the liberty cycle where we hand away our liberty and trundle towards tyranny, and then have to fight very hard to get it back someday.
I read a fascinating article after the November elections, which said that the reason why Virginia went Democrat was not because of the people who live in Virginia changing their minds, but because of the new people who have moved into Virginia.
Yeah.
And they've fled oftentimes, heavy Democrat cities in the Northeast and have moved down here because of our standard of living and are then bringing their electoral values with them. So
maybe we can make the case. Maybe we can make the case that your standard of living was bad up there because of these electoral values.
Well, that's right. Yes, the high tax, high regulation, statist mindset. I don't think produces a great outcome.
It has been brought up, Scott Cosenza, last one for you. It's been brought up that they're going to do what they're going to do, and we have to then fight them in court. As much as conservatives don't feel like they should have to fight unconstitutional things in court, we don't have a system where the Supreme Court just sits outside the legislative chambers and looks at every law that passes and determines whether it's constitutional or not. They have to be brought to court and it's stood up for. I've been told that's going to be the way we fight back on a lot of these, but there are a lot of states that have done worse than Virginia's doing right now, and nobody has done that, or very few people have done it with very little success. Is that a fool's errand to think that we can fight back on these in courts and hope that perhaps the president has appointed enough conservative originalist judges to the benches of the Fourth Circuit, for example?
Well, I think it's dangerous to wait or to sort of say, well, the Democrats won, and so for people who want to see these bills thwarted, they should fight in the legislature and maybe get some results there. I will tell you that Clarence Thomas himself, Joe, has written publicly about how the court treats Second Amendment rights like a redheaded stepchild and doesn't embrace and write in defense of them like it does all the other rights that it has kind of read into the incorporation doctrine and applied against the states. So there is some movement on the court itself, anyway, to see these things perhaps be heard. We now have Gorsuch, and we don't yet have a gun case heard this term, but maybe there's some hope with the new appointments.
Yeah, and certainly I feel like some of the lower courts are at least growing more conservative. Heck, the president won a case in the Ninth Circuit of all places, so I guess anything
Joe,
can happen.
Yeah. Donald Trump's record of judicial appointments has been remarkably pro-liberty. And also remarkably effective, with Harry Reid clearing the way for bare majority Senate appointments to the federal judiciary and Trump's willingness to work with the Federalist Society on getting high quality candidates in there. This is something that will pay dividends for decades.
Long after you and me and everyone else is retired off to happy acres. Scott, thank you so much for everything, and I'm sure we'll visit again as the General Assembly session continues its 60-day slog through all this. But I deeply appreciate everything that you do. It's libertynation.com, and thank you for all your help here with the Virginia Institute for Public Policy.
And thank you for you and your work too. I appreciate it. Look to come back.
Thank you for listening. We'll keep you abreast of what's going on Monday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and what will come of Lobby Day there. Until next week when we kind of report back and go over it. So long, and thanks for all the fish.